is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft beer and craft chocolate. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional beer writer and an advanced Cicerone, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. Hey everyone, this is David. Thanks for listening to the Bean to Barstool podcast. Enjoy. I want to go to Norway. Familial circumstances prevent me from knowing many of the details of my ancestry, but I do know that I'm at least partially of Norwegian heritage, and I have a proper Norwegian surname in Nilsson, so I've always felt an affinity for this Scandinavian country of steep fjords and deep waters. One of the great heartbreaks of my 6th grade year of middle school was my best friend stealing Norway from me when we were being assigned countries for research reports. I went home, cried, and then wrote about Poland instead and got a better grade than he did anyway. I've been fascinated in recent years by the research of Lars Marius Garsol about farmhouse brewing traditions of Norway, and the opportunity to taste these esoteric and rustic beers has me wanting to visit this beautiful northern land all the more. Hopefully we can put COVID to bed soon and begin moving about the world again, and when that happens, Norway will be near the top of my list for destinations. In the meantime, I can travel there with my senses through beers brewed here in the U.S. that seek to recreate Norwegian brewing traditions and ingredients, and through Norwegian bean-to-bar chocolate. Today we're going to talk with a bean-to-bar maker who is partnering with a prominent Norwegian craft brewery to create a chocolate bar that is perhaps more evocative of the Amazon than the Arctic, but nonetheless demonstrates the tapestry of influences that make beer and chocolate so exciting. Several months back, I got a message on Instagram from Karina Jimenez, who runs Choco by Karina, a bean-to-bar chocolate company in Sandnes in the Rogaland region of southwestern Norway. She had a chocolate bar she wanted me to try that had been made with a stout from Lervig Beer in nearby Stavanger. I'm always interested in tasting a chocolate made with beer, or vice versa, so I gave her my address and didn't think much more about it till it arrived. When I opened the box, the packaging of the bar caught my eye immediately and reminded me more of the playful tone of beer labeling than chocolate, with a hairy, blissed-out, multi-armed ape man chilling against a background of psychedelic blue. Stout, as we've talked about here before, derives its roasty flavors and aromas from dark malts that get roasted much like how cacao beans do, and the easy synergy between stout styles and most chocolate is reliable and pleasant. But often those flavors overlap so much that it can be hard to tell where one stops and the other begins. One taste of this bar, though, showed it was something completely unique from that standard, recognizable combination. Lervig Beer is a moderately large craft brewery producing about 17,000 barrels of beer per year in Stavanger, Norway's 4th largest metro area and the center of the nation's foodie culture. The brewery's 3-bean stout is brewed with vanilla, cacao, and tonka beans and weighs in at a hefty 13% alcohol. And the chocolate bar Karina makes from this is both familiar in its comforts and exciting in its surprises. I talked recently with Karina and David Graham, head brewer at Lervig, who is actually originally from Saskatchewan, Canada, about the beer, the bar, and the 3 beans in question. Karina, why don't you tell me a little bit about how you ended up in Norway? You were born in Venezuela, right?
I did. I was born in Caracas. I met my husband, and I'm an immigrant of love, let's to say it that way. But I am a trained chef from my country and a pastry chef. And I was well acquainted with the cacao life and the cacao industry in Venezuela, which I was very lucky to come from. It's a country well known for fine cacao industry. So when I moved to Norway, I couldn't find a job as a pastry chef. This is 11 years ago. In this region. So that is something that is quite new in the restaurant branch, having a designated pastry chef. Normally it's just a cook that does something sweet. And then I was missing actually working with Venezuelan chocolate, or like with the Venezuelan flavors. And that's where, following along the bean-to-bar movement from America, kind of thought, okay, this might be my opportunity to create my own job and work where I want to work, and bring also something from my own culture to Norway, in the form of chocolate. So that's how the idea started.
Yeah. Have you had a chance besides cacao to use any ingredients or flavors from Venezuelan tradition in your chocolate?
Actually, my focus has been to use the Venezuelan cacao as a dialogue with the Norwegian culture. So I'm quite happy to have Venezuelan cacao, but using the local Scandinavian products. And so I'm quite lucky because in the region where we are, which is the Rogaland, is known for being like the gastronomical area of the country, since we have a lot of crops that grow locally and many craft makers. So it's quite of a bubbly food scene here. So I do have plenty of interesting products to collaborate with in my own chocolates.
How did the relationship between the brewery and the chocolate begin?
Well, I also worked in my early career in Venezuela in a big brewery, and Venezuelans, we love Pilsen style. It's a big company that is part of our culture, and it's very common that you just drink those by the beach. So yeah, I love beer from before. And when I learned from Ler, because they are quite of a rock stars locally, and they, before Corona times, they have a big beer festival, and they are like a host, and they come from all over the world, and so they do have this local and international supporters that love them. So as soon as I learned that they were the local makers, and I started trying their beers, and they are very creative. They do all sort of crazy combinations, and every year there's something new with them. So it was quite easy to spot them and have them on my beer map, let's say that way. So I took the courage to approach them when I tried their 3-bean beer. I am personally a stout lover, and then I wasn't quite aware that they were into stouts too. So this beer, I bought it, and I learned that it was like a limited edition, like it's not available all the time, so everybody's like really keen to buy it when they find it on the shops. So I have this good friend that she's also into especially Lervig beer. So we found it, and then we got the other ones, and it's like, this beer is like already like a perfect dessert. I really have to make chocolate with it. So that's where I took the courage to contact them and present the idea that whether they would be happy to collaborate with me, and they were super happy. Like they were really supportive, and yeah, they're nice people to work with.
Dave, tell me a little bit about the 3-bean stout.
It started way back when, I think in 2014 or 2015. We usually attend this festival in Copenhagen in the spring. We invited a Brazilian brewery who was also attending that same festival just to pop up and do a collaboration with us. So we still hadn't we knew we were going to make a stout, and we hadn't quite decided on what we were going to do to make it unique, I guess, or give it kind of a touch of the elements of the collab. So we were out for dinner, like the collab dinner. The maitre d' at the restaurant we were at, who's a friend of ours as well. He's a real flavor genius. Anyway, he had some tonka beans I'd never heard of or smelt before or anything. Neither had Mike, and the Brazilian guys knew what they were. So he brought out things over, and we all smelt them. Like, okay, that's perfect. We decided, all right, we knew we were going to put vanilla in, and tonka. All right, well, we need to just complete the trifecta, throw some cocoa in there as well. So that was originally a collab that kind of just kept on trickling through our production, and people always wanted it, and it's carried through to today. And now we're doing a bunch of different barrel aged versions. Now Karina's making the chocolate, so it was born kind of out of serendipity.
So we're starting to see tonka beans pop up in stouts here, but I still don't think most of us know anything about the beans themselves. Can one of you explain a little bit more about tonka beans as an ingredient?
Sure. By coincidence, Venezuela had a big production of tonka beans before the oil time. So it was cacao and tonka beans export. They do come from the Amazon. That's why also it's found in Brazil. And it was mostly for the perfume industry, is widely known and used there. The flavor profile, it's unique, but if you never tried it before, it's like a cross between vanilla, cinnamon, and nutmeg kind of thing. So it's a very aromatic, and actually you should use just a little bit. So it kind of fed your blood circulation if you use in big amounts, because it has coumarin, which is a substance that is regulated, but it just takes just a tiny bit to infuse a lot of flavor. So over here in the last years, it's very popular on ice creams. You will find it. And then, some bars. But so far it has been, just me. And with Lervig beer, to me, it was just like the tonka bean flavor was something that really caught on my palate. And I was just like, I can't believe it. This is in beer and it tastes so good. So
before we started, I'd never even heard of tonka before we made the 3-bean. But just as Karina says, like it was immediately familiar in some aspects. At least the aroma is very cinnamon. I get almond. People get coconut, so it's a bit of a familiar chameleon that will express itself depending on who you are or what you pair it with, and it does a lot to bring out those kind of notes in the beer as well. It expresses itself in a bunch of different ways, and depending on who you are, you'll get those aspects of what Karina just described.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Final Gravity Issue 5 is now available in the shop on beantobarstool.com. This 5th issue of our zine telling personal, human-centered stories from the world of beer is full of great articles. Bano Segudu tells the story of the South African beer style Umkombothi, poignantly explaining its role in her culture and the importance in her family's celebrations and milestones. Maria Krugliak writes about discovering the Portuguese half pint after moving to Portugal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amanda Bruns and Obakeng Malope discuss the water spirit Mamuhaswa and the collaboration beer they brewed in her honor. These and numerous other stories fill the 56 pages of this zine. We've expanded it and added a few features for this issue. It's full color, full of lots of beautiful photography and art. Definitely check this out. It's on beantobarstool.com/shop. You can purchase this issue or subscribe, and you can always support us on Patreon and get extra perks as well. Cheers. What format do you add that to the beer? Are you putting in whole beans, or how do you?
No, so they're like rock hard. We've broken several blenders over the years. We finally invested in a good one last year, but they're extremely hard beans that are about they're maybe an inch long and kind of ovate. So we just blend them up into as fine of a powder as we can, and after the beer is fermented, along with the vanilla and the cocoa nibs, we just put them in a kind of a vessel where we can recirculate the beer over and do like an overnight extraction after the beer is fermented, and then it goes into the packaging tank. A little goes a long way, I would say. As Karina said, 3 kilos was enough to overpoweringly flavor 6,000 liters of beer.
Wow. I misspoke a bit when I said tonka beans were popping up in stouts here in the U.S. As you'll hear in just a moment, these beans are actually illegal for commercial food and beverage production here. What is popping up is plenty of conversation about tonka beans in beer, and buzz around beers brewed with these legumes elsewhere. I've been hearing this buzz and assumed I just hadn't come across the tonka bean stouts everyone was talking about. The beans do get used by more daring chefs and mixologists on the down low, though, so you might have tasted them at some point and not even realized it. To learn more about tonka beans, I turned to Amy Stewart's excellent book, The Drunken Botanist: The Plants That Create the World's Great Drinks, a book I'm constantly pulling off my shelf to learn more about the dazzling array of unusual ingredients in my favorite adult beverages. Stewart explains the tonka bean grows on a tree native to the damp soils along the Orinoco River in Venezuela. Early European colonizers brought the bean back to London to be cultivated in hothouses, where it was used in perfume, baking, tobacco products, and to mask the dreadful smell of an early antiseptic. It didn't take too long for the bean to make it into alcohol, finding use in bitters and liqueurs. That made it across the Atlantic, of course, but in 1954, tonka beans were banned by the FDA because, as Karina stated, They contain coumarin, a substance that has been shown to cause liver damage in rats when taken in high doses. A modified version of coumarin is used as a blood thinner, but doesn't possess that property in its natural state in the beans. So, liver damage? That sounds bad, right? The thing is that comparable amounts of coumarin are found in numerous other spices like cinnamon, lavender, and licorice, and those foods are deemed perfectly safe by the FDA. As Ike DeLorenzo explained in a 2010 article in The Atlantic, a human would need to consume about 30 whole tonka beans to approach toxic, damaging levels. And since a single potently flavored tonka bean is enough to season about 80 plates of food, that is pretty unrealistic. Nutmeg and other everyday spices would become toxic too at that level. Logic notwithstanding, the FDA still does not allow tonka beans to be used in foods or drinks in the United States. Hopefully this unfortunate embargo on such an aromatic ingredient will be lifted soon. Norway has no such law, which means Karina's excellent 3-bean stout bar is my only exposure to this unique flavor. I asked her how she used Lervig's original 3-bean stout in the bar. Tell me a little bit then about the bar, Karina. How did you actually use the stout in the bar, since you can't really introduce a liquid to the chocolate making process? Are you just steeping the cacao?
Yeah.
How are you doing that?
Well, actually, I think I will have to kill you now, but okay. I will share my secret. No, my focus was, since the beer tastes so good, and I know Lervig has so many fans around the world that might not get the chance to try the beer. So for me, what's very important to keep the beer flavor as the star. The way I think it conveys it best is just to infuse the actual cacao beans after I roast them and turn them into nibs. Then I bathe them literally on the beer. The ratio that is that the nibs will absorb all the beer. So it's a process that takes me around 3 weeks, that I have to turn every other day the cacao mass in a way that the nib mass infused. So every day it will soak up until the end of the 3rd week is already absorbed everything. And then just to make sure, I will dehydrate them for the chocolate process to be able to complete smoothly. Because as you said, if I have any moisture in them, then it will be a disaster in the refining process. It is, but I think the process is so well worth it, because to me it preserves, because when you are refining, it also adds up a little bit of the temperature, so you lose mostly of the alcohol, but then since the beer has so much flavor to it, so I use a bean that it has a nutty profile instead of a floral one, because I didn't want that to compete with the beer flavor. So I think this reinforces more in another aspect of the bar, and it doesn't interfere so much in the aromatics of the beer. But it does add to the flavor, because it gives a fudge texture to it that I don't get with the same beans in another recipe. Even though I dehydrated and all that, there is some of the molasses and the sugars from the beer that do get across anyway. So I think one of the aspects I find very appealing is the texture, that it gets very fudgy, that any other of my range of bars I get with the other mets. So I'm really happy with that, I feel.
What are some of the other bars that you make?
Well, I have 2 others that are 75%, and one I infuse with flowers, and the other one I infuse with juniper berries. So it's more, I have customers that enjoy gin, and they find that very appealing. And some of them think I add gin to the bar because it's it has that profile. I try to keep it on the darker range when I want the flavors of the inclusions to show up. And for me, that's my philosophy, that I feel that people is not familiar with Scandinavian or local flavors, that they might try it on my bar and enjoy it. I do have now in the machine, I'm refining oats. I found out that Scandinavia is one of the biggest producers of oats in the world, and we are supposed to have a good quality of that. So that's what I use on my chocolate too. So my philosophy is a bit keeping away from the dairy, because number one, I think there's already so many good products with dairy in it. And number two, it keeps me a clean canvas for showcasing flavor. So that's why I, at the moment, stay away from dairy products also.
Dave, what cacao are you using in the stout?
We actually get it from our local coffee roaster, Stavanger Cafe Brunnery. He's been importing it for us from their Ecuadorian. Karina actually would know more about those because she's seen what we use. It's not the highest quality. We've kind of been over that a bit, I think, with Karina and everything, and I think that the characteristic that we would otherwise get from like maybe a better quality bean isn't going to come through in the beer. So we just want those kind of like deep, rich cocoa tones that are perfectly fine from. I don't know. I don't know what the quality bean is. I just know they're Ecuadorian.
Actually, you shared some samples with me, and I was able to look into it. And it's Ecuadorian, and it's I would say like a darker roast cacao. So I think it gives a great profile to complement the beer because they are looking for that cacao well-defined flavor, and I think it comes across really well. So it works for their concept. It works really well. I think if it was a bean that had a milder roast and it would have these other profiles, it wouldn't complement the beer as well. Because it also gives, surprisingly, a really nice, rich texture. Like comes out some of the fat into the beer, in my opinion. So it's very creamy and it's a tasteful beer to enjoy.
How do you feel like the flavor from the beer comes through directly to the bar? Is it a pretty direct translation, or do you feel like there's a shift there in the way that it changes with the chocolate?
When Karina brought over the samples the first time, there was no like searching for it. It was just like, oh yeah, that's it. Nailed it.
Karina, how about you?
Well, as I said, I was really, excited and nervous about doing it well. I think it's a very aromatic bar. Like when you open the packet and it really hits you, all these delicate aromas. And I was really scared that it wouldn't come as good in the taste, but I think it did. So to me, it also tastes like the beer. So that was for me the focal point, just to honor the product I was working with.
What's the ABV on that beer?
13%.
13?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a serious beer. Has there been any conversation about other collabs besides working with this three bean stout? I mean, other ways that the two of you can partner?
Yeah, well, I do wish to work with all of them, but it's so hard to keep up with them. They are so creative and they have so many. I don't know, Dave, you can help me to describe, but I tried the one, it's called with peanut butter. You have a stout with peanut butter. I thought that was super delicious, and one with the peanut butter marshmallow also. Is it right?
Yeah, the peanut butter ones I think could work pretty well. I mean, I would say definitely one way we're collaborating is that there's still a lot of I guess goodness left in the nibs after we're done with them, and they're otherwise going in with our like spent grain bin. They're going for cattle feed, but a few times Karina's just come and taken our like kind of spent nibs and done whatever. She's either has her own project, so at least
yeah, that's coming up. That's coming up, making something out of the spent bins. So that's also very nice. They do transform after they've been through the beer process, and the ones that we picked up last time. Do you remember, Dave, when we opened it? It really hit us with this crazy banana split flavor. It was amazing. We were both amazing. Like, what is this? So yeah, I do have them. So they might come right after the summer.
I've had a couple chocolate bars made from basically spent cacao, like you're talking about, and it is pretty wild the change that you get in the flavor. I don't know if some of that is biotransformation that we don't understand, like we get with hops in some cases, or if it's just the infusion of flavor. But it's pretty unique.
You'll be on the VIP list, don't worry.
Excellent.
They will.
Well, I got to get over there at some point. I was telling Dave we were supposed to take a trip through Northern Europe this fall, and couldn't because of COVID. So at some point we'll get over there, and hopefully we can taste in person.
That would be nice. You should really make it to the beer festival that they organize over here. It's just super cool.
Dave, I assume you didn't really have any exposure to bean to bar chocolate before this?
No. I guess you're mildly aware of these types of things in any industry, but it wasn't something that I ever experienced myself or knew anyone who was doing. So yeah, it's nice to meet a fellow producer of something and expand your knowledge base.
What story is Three Bean Stout telling?
I think it's kind of indicative of craft beer in general, taking inspiration from colleagues around the world and bringing it into what might otherwise previously be considered a wild concept. And now, like you said, Tonka is coming into the craft beer psyche in the States, and now it's not such a crazy foreign ingredient. Yeah, the entire thing is just sharing knowledge and ingredients and experimenting. And
Karina, what story is Three Bean Stout chocolate telling?
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, my book on pairing craft beer and craft chocolate is available now on Amazon and on the Bean to Barstool shop. Pairing Beer and Chocolate, a guide to bringing the flavors of craft beer and craft chocolate together, is out now. This paperback book explains the process of pairing beer and chocolate, includes a guide to hosting a pairing at home, walks through dozens of beer styles to provide style-by-style pairing guidance, and gives room for taking your own pairing notes along the way. This is the only book on pairing beer and chocolate available. Grab your copy now at the link in the show notes or on Amazon. If you manage a tap room, bookstore, chocolate shop, or cafe and want to stock the book, get in touch about our easy wholesale process. Beer and chocolate belong together, and this book is your guide to getting the most out of every pairing.
Well, to me, it's the perfect marriage between beer and chocolate, and to honor the stout and the chocolate combination that is just like a match made in heaven, and a beer that is actually I never tried before. I didn't know that you could make such a spiced, flavorful, creamy beer, and it shows craftsmanship. It shows interest for new flavors, and I think also I would like to add that another thing that makes Lervig super cool is their design of the packaging. They have this insane illustrator in Denmark, and I was so honored when they even chip in for me the packaging for my bar. I couldn't believe it that Nana Guldberg will be making that for me too, because she's so super creative, and I think embodies the spirit of Lervig, which is just freedom. Like they make these combinations and create something new, and it's just they have a legion of people that we just love whatever they do. And the packaging also embodies that. It's just so free and creative, and to me I like mine because it's just the spirit when you eat the chocolate that you feel like all sort of things and flavors that might take you traveling around the world or relaxes you because it's chocolate and it makes you happy. And if you see the guy in the packaging just like chilling out with experience. So I thought it was such a lovely way to wrap up all the product. So I'm forever grateful to Larry for that.
Karina's Three Bean Stout bar has a warm and complex but gentle spice profile of cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla layered through the rich, fudgy foundation of the 70% dark chocolate. Despite listing those baking spices, though, they don't exactly hit the unique profile from the tonka beans, both floral and warming, creamy and bright. I said recently that the two poles of the tasting experience are comfort and provocation, and this bar offers both. So what about the unusual wrapper with a strange blue being with red finger and toenails lounging about sampling beans? That came from the mind of Nana Guldberg, a graphic designer from Denmark who designs all the labels for Lervig's beers as well. I recently spoke with Nana about the curious creatures who grace her designs and how the flavor of a beer, or in this case, a chocolate, informs her creative decisions.
So I used to work in beer as a bartender like a long time ago now. It was via that work that I got to meet the head brewers at a beer festival in Tallinn in Estonia, quite randomly. And me and David actually kept in touch afterwards. And he knew that at that time I was studying at a design school. So he was like, hey, you know what, we're actually looking for someone who's, to redo our designs. So do you want to kind of give it a shot? Interesting enough. So what I did was actually that I did a draft of 2 labels, and I sent them a PDF with like a presentation of the sketches I've done, and where I printed out the labels and put it on a beer. And actually one of the beers was the Three Bean Stout that I did like a draft on at that time. I kind of went back a little bit about just now when I knew we were going to talk about it, because like, oh, that's actually quite funny that it was that beer, because that was like the first beer I ever did something for when it comes to Lervig.
Oh, wow. We were actually going to be in Tallinn this past fall until obviously the pandemic prevented that, but it looks like a beautiful city.
Very, yeah.
So when did that begin? When did you do those initial pieces?
I think it's back in 2017, actually. Yeah, around that New Year, I think. It was like on New Year's Eve 2017, I think I sent the first drafts. And then it just snowballed quickly from there. At that time, I was still in design school, but it was like quickly, it just started to be like more and more work. And before I actually graduated school, I worked as art director for them. So I was very lucky in that way.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the idea behind the design for the Three Bean Stout label in particular.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously it was like, we got these three beans quite specifically. We got the cacao, the vanilla, and the tonka bean, where like the tonka bean was, to me, that's the one that kind of sticks out mostly in the beer because it has like a bit of that cinnamon flavor to it. So you got like the vanilla and the cocoa, which is more soft and mellow in the nuances in the beer. And then you got this tonka bean, who's like heavy and almost like adds a bit of punchiness to the beer. So when I started like working with the beer, like generally most of the work I do, I always start with like the beer itself, like what kind of tones and nuances do I combine with, like what kind of shapes does that represent? And to me, like the vanilla and the chocolate was like these warm and mellow, soft shapes. And at that time, so like this label is made originally back in 2017, and I think it got a redesign in 2019 when we did like some small edits to it. So at that time, I worked a lot with like watercolor and mixed media. So using watercolor and finishing in digital, like Photoshop. So to me, I kind of work with like the warm, mellow feeling of flavors and notes from the vanilla and the chocolate. I created like these soft, brown, mellow shapes that represents just the beans in themselves. And then we got like this, like the turquoise in the background, which is more of representing of the tonka bean and like that punchiness I was speaking about earlier. And then we got like the character in itself, which is, it like directly has eaten three beans and has become like stronger and powerful by eating it. Like it got like big muscles and like and a very like fast moving like just the way it positions its body on the label. So that kind of like again represents like that kind of like punchiness you get from a beer in this league, with the alcohol percentage also being as it is. So that's like the original thought behind the label, yeah.
Karina mentioned that you also then did the label design for the bar that she made from that. What changes did you make to fit that?
Yeah, so with that one, I wanted to do something different specifically for the chocolate bar. And as I remembered, I wanted to move a little bit away from the character we used on the beer label and kind of create a character that represented a little bit more how the characters look today with Lervik. I call them yeast men, the characters kind of representing what yeast does in a beer. It's not like they don't really represent, human beings in this. I see them more as kind of representing what yeast does to a beer.
That character, at least for the Lervig beers, I mean, you kind of do variations of over and over, and looking at your Instagram, that matches a lot of the type of character art that you do. How would you describe the type of character art that you're doing and what went into that being kind of your thing, your design?
A lot of it comes from a place where I don't necessarily want things to be pretty. Like I quite like when things are rough or wiggly and weird and comes from a place of being strange or odd looking. And I think a lot of that comes from when I was younger. I was very inspired by mythical creatures and mythical stories found in like Nordic history. So I think that kind of, and a lot of those stories are very like dark. Like they come from a dark place and has very local stories around them are just, they're not very nice, honestly. And I think my style has always kind of been representing like that, things that's not necessarily needs to be like pretty, but more needs to be telling a story, if that makes sense. They should emphasize the story we're telling about the beer and not necessarily be pretty to kind of reach that goal.
What did you think of Carina's Three Bean Stout chocolate bar?
It was really nice. I had it first time during the summer last year, I think, when she just had done it. And I got to taste like a little bit of her different kind of chocolates, which was nice because then you can kind of, when you have something to compare it with, then I think the notes gets a little bit more prominent, perhaps in the chocolate itself. Yeah, I was actually listening to a few of your episodes now because I knew we were going to speak. So I thought I was listening to your last episode around like the language with beer and, you know, how you kind of describe a beer and stuff. And I thought it was really interesting because I think it was one of the, even now when you're doing, like when you're talking about a beer or your design in a language that's not your own, you do get somehow challenged sometimes because you don't necessarily have like the same kind of words for, you know, how you describe something. Like as you mentioned, you know, people speaking about hay and barn and how, you know, a language for that. And I was especially thinking from my being a bartender, how a lot of the time we would use English phrases because I think that was the language you heard when it came to beer, and like how you were describing it to the customers often was also using English phrases rather than Danish perhaps. But I think there's definitely something there's lost in translation when it comes to like what you're actually tasting and how you describe it then.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Do you find that even with like American versus English, or how?
The biggest place that I see that is describing English malt character as biscuity, which they're talking about English biscuits, which are like cookies here in the US. But since we don't call them that, American beer drinkers will hear biscuity and think of a very different type of baked good that we have here that is nothing like English biscuits.
But I do think there is like this kind of I'm doing it more and more when it comes to my work, because I think early on all the work I used to do would be in English actually, just because if I knew if I was going to have someone else working on it, it has to be like something that anyone could read. But when you do all your notes and all your thoughts in English, then you do lose some kind of like that. It's hard to describe what it is, but you lose like some of the small details to description or a sketch or whatever it is.
Do you find that when you're doing that for yourself, do you do any like backward translation to try to find something in Danish that fits it better for yourself?
Yeah, and sometimes I will even with the brewery, I will try and like, I will always try to work with it in Danish or Norwegian first, and then try and find like the English phrase for it, or because I think in some way it should originate in the mother language. Same comes to our bars actually. So Løvik has opened like 2 bars, the latest last year, and there we had a discussion about whether all signage should be in English or if it should be in Norwegian. And I really pushed for things to first stand in Norwegian and then stand in English rather than the opposite. But I think it's something there's a bigger focus on these years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm glad we ended on the topic of culture and language, because the chocolate bar that was the subject of our episode was the product of the skill and creativity of a Venezuelan chocolate maker and a Canadian brewer, both living in Norway, and a Danish designer who had been living in London and became aware of the brewer while traveling in Estonia. This one sensory experience has so many cultural and geographical and linguistic threads leading to it that it feels emblematic of the themes that drive this podcast. The way flavor interacts with our memories, emotions, imaginations, and identities to teach us more about who we are. David, Nana, and most directly Carina all tell us something about who they are through this project, as their creative choices are informed by people they've met, places they've lived, cultures they're a part of, and experiences they've had. When we taste a chocolate bar or a beer, we're able to read some of the story that led to its creation, even if part or all of that story was written in a different language. You can learn more about David, Carina, and Nana, as well as Løvik Beer and Choco by Carina in the show notes. Let your friends know about this show if you think they would enjoy it, and of course, please leave a review on your preferred listening platform so more people can find the show. If there's a topic you'd like to see covered on this podcast, drop me a line through social media or at beantobarstool@gmail.com. You can also let me know if you've had a good chocolate beer or beer-infused chocolate, or if you come across any you think I would find interesting, or even if you just have an interesting reflection on the tasting process. If you feel inspired to share one of your own beer and chocolate pairings on Instagram, tag the post with the Bean to Barstool hashtag so I can see it and comment. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.